But before I start, how do you celebrate a life of a man who had so much positive impact in our society? How do you celebrate a life of a man who, when Ya Toivo retired, he was the only one amongst us to realize that something was not normal. He created a position, a symbolic one, so that Ya Toivo can sit in his office and earn a living wage. He provided a driver and he provided a vehicle. And we all woke up later because he gave us an idea how to care for others. Akapandi would have been 63 years today. While we have lost his physical presence among us on the 23rd of January 2022, we have every reason to celebrate his life. Since his passing, many of us have never met. It is true. This too is the heavy cost of his death, measured in a loss of progress, opportunities, and a loss of community of friends. Akapandi used his greatest possession he had, being his life, to bring long-term change to our society in the realm of black economic emancipation. He invested his good ideas, time and resources in his fight for equitable socio-economic conditions for our people, especially those who were in the past socially, economically and educationally disadvantaged black Namibians. Akapandi was consumed by strong and higher ideals and notions of a Namibia, where tangible policies and programs should be in place to banish underdevelopment, dehumanizing poverty, and spatial inequities. Akapandi, driven by moral necessity to restore human dignity to blacks in particular, in the new Namibia, felt compelled both as a trade unionist and a business leader to uplift others. He was always in solidarity with the downtrodden and social reject. With this background, I must thank the Endjala family for deciding befittingly to institute the John Akapandi Endjala Memorial Lecture. Akapandi's work aimed at bringing about prosperity, social peace, hope, and peace of mind to our people was especially seen when he compellingly called for black economic empowerment through the Indigenous Business Council, Forum, and more so later at the Namibia Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Akapandi recognized that those who were socially and economically disadvantaged and actually ostracized by the brutal apartheid system will not be able to have social justice and dignified life in the absence of radical and aggressive state-driven economic transformation agenda. Thus, he almost slavishly wanted structural and policy changes in our society. Akapandi then resolved to fight for social justice in the realms of economic transformation is not surprising. His resolve to fight was born out of the socio-economic state of our country. The High Court of Namibia, quoting from a South African case, once observed, and I quote, "We live in a society in which there are great disparities in wealth, Millions of our people are living in deplorable conditions and in great poverty. There is a high level of unemployment, inadequate social security, and many do not have access to clean water or to adequate health services. These conditions already existed when the Constitution was adopted, and a commitment to address them and to transform our society into one in which there will be human dignity, freedom, and equality lies at the heart of our new constitutional order. For as long as this condition continues to exist, that aspiration will have a hollow ring. Akapandi was known for his deep sense of humanity, excellence in business, solidarity, compassionate leadership, and unyielding advocacy for socio-economic advancement. It is the last of the three many noble values that he stood for we look at tonight. Hence, in his honor, this evening we pose the question: can there be a realization of the right to the pursuit of happiness stated in the preamble to the Namibian Constitution without tangible economic transformation, policies, and programs in favor of persons who were in the past socially and economically disadvantaged? The Namibian Constitution, like those of Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, Swaziland, and Egypt, proclaims and assures citizens of the right to the pursuit of happiness. Frederick Fourie, writing on the Namibian Constitution and economic rights, right at the independence of Namibia, defended the preamble to the Namibian Constitution by appropriately explaining that it is carried by the struggle against colonialism and racism, and that it was built around the denial of the right of the individual life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by colonialism, racism, and apartheid. Thus, it is not surprising that because of the prolonged denial of basic dignity to our people, the memory of economic exploitation against blacks left a heritage of profound sense of repulsion at and rebellion against any form or sign of perpetuation of economic inequity, poverty, and lack of justice in the social and economic space. Our founding mothers and fathers, in fact, there is one tonight, Memependu Kenny, I think he was the only founding mother at the Constituent Assembly, were well aware that the arrival of independence will not, in the absence of targeted action, be able to address the collective trauma suffered by blacks due to years of economic exploitation. They, therefore, speaking about our founding fathers and founding mothers, commendably directed under Article 23, Sub-Article 2 of the Namibian Constitution, that the right of all persons to be treated equally before the law shall not prevent. So in other words, even if the Constitution says that everyone must be equal to the others, Parliament is not prevented from enacting legislation providing directly, and by saying directly, that is to have a wholesale law on black empowerment, and indirectly mean in your other laws, when you deal with petroleum products and so forth, you factor in black empowerment. For the advancement of persons who have been socially, economically, and educationally disadvantaged by apartheid, nor for the implementation. In other words, government is not prevented from implementing policies and programs aimed at redressing social, economic, and educational imbalances in the Namibian society, arising out the past discriminatory laws and practices. It is thus clear that because our Constitution philosophically constitutionalizes the pursuit of happiness, the state in its action and policies must seek to maximize citizens' overall happiness and well-being. This it does by proactively passing laws aimed at making fundamental changes to the structures of the economy and redressing the multitudes of social imbalances. This state duty is more pronounced when it comes to blacks. There's no shame about it. When it comes to blacks who to this day collectively suffer debilitating trauma generation after generation due to the deep-rooted effect and extent of past apartheid policies. Akapandi understood this. Hence, he advocated for a real and tangible change in our society so that black could enjoy decent living conditions. 37 years after independence, with the perfect constitutional license, under Article 23, Sub-Article 2 for our parliament to pass laws to bring about positive economic transformation for the benefit of blacks, and for government to pursue programs and policies aimed at redressing imbalances, I dare ask, is there any hope that the pursuit of happiness, colorfully and expressly promised in the preamble to our Constitution, is something that has been realized, or at least to be realized by blacks in the near future? I ask the question. Akapandi knew that we did not make progress in this respect. He took it upon himself. Through his selfless work and advocacy, generosity and solidarity, a number of black business people are now having flourishing businesses. I am one of them. On the eve of my admission as a legal practitioner of the High Court of Namibia in March 2003, I wanted an office space to practice law. I found one on the 8th floor of the Capital Center in Windhoek City Center. Unfortunately, the owners of the building considered me a financial risk and refused to give me a lease agreement. It was Akapandi who stepped in and entered into a 3-year lease agreement with the landlord in his own name to enable me to commence my long-dreamed career being a lawyer. In fact, it was Tata Akapandi who convinced Tate Ndoroma and Tate Otto Shikongo that in 2005 I buy their building in Windhoek West, Pasteur Street, where my office is still to this date. This impactful and act on the part of Akapandi enabled me then, an impressionable but socially, economically wounded young law graduate. It enabled me to shine, to help, to build, to train, to educate, to serve and uplift others. The rest is not only history but a good history. Akapandi drove the black economic empowerment agenda so neatly and effectively. He was effective and impactful because he was a man free of the primitive culture of jealousy-flavored competition often seen in black communities. Akapandi won't circulate on a WhatsApp group a black person's business matters and advert somebody's house is being sold because you have debts on the morning of the newspaper coming out. Many black people, your friends, your business partners will be the first to circulate that Sisa's house is on sale. It's true. He took the success of others as his own success. His good deed notwithstanding, we know that no one man can transform a society such as Namibia, which remains deeply scarred by its dark history. I contend that if it was not for prolonged racial injustice, there would have been relative social justice and equality of economic opportunities in our country. This is so because by nature, all men and women ought to be equal and relatively happy, just to be happy, even not to be very happy. The Americans, on their part, in 1776, in their Declaration of Independence, put it that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It appears that, therefore, that given the historical context within which our Constitution was born, the phrase "the pursuit of happiness" in its preamble is not a mere glittering rhetoric. It was a promise of decent life, and an articulation of our people's aspirations and values. The pursuit of happiness is therefore intended to articulate and posit that Namibians must be able, in a post-independence era, to live lives endowed with human dignity. The idea was that there must be state-sponsored citizens' well-being and human fellowship. For blacks in general, I'm afraid, this remained an urgent call to action directed at those who are in power. For both our parliament and executive, modesty and restraint seem to be anathema to matters of economic advancement of blacks. It is exactly because modesty and restraint that we now have a rich state and a poor population. A Namibia where an average black man can barely live. And if he's able to somehow hustle and somewhat live, then hellish life awaits. The pursuit of happiness by our people, if the black transformation proclamation in our Constitution is to be an impactful norm, must mean that blacks must benefit from the new political order beyond civic right to vote after every 5 years. Parliament, it was stated on the date of independence 37 years ago, is not prevented from enacting legislation to directly advance blacks. And we use these sorry flavored words like formerly disadvantaged. It's talking about blacks. We are fearing to say formerly, we are fearing to say whites and say formerly advantaged. We are not being racist. This constitutional imperative must influence and guide all of our actions and must be embraced and supported by both whites and blacks. What has since been done? Where are the direct and indirect laws providing for real advancement of black in our country? Something that is perfectly constitutional. It's an embarrassment. 37 years of independence, we don't have black empowerment law, a direct one. And talk about indirect one. I was representing a former plant combatant in a town. There is a filling station owned by a white person. A black person buys a property, buys tanks, then is blocked in court because procedures were not followed, whatever. But because nothing was factored in the law consent to support if becomes interest of a black and white, at least for the black person to benefit, notwithstanding procedural non-compliance. A black former plane combatant is now prohibited from running a filling station in a town because a white person who benefited from generational wealth must apparently trade. What is the problem if he suffered against almost more than 1 million of black people in street? It's a problem. Because of this is exactly why there remains a deep happiness deficit among black people in Namibia. Because of the years of racial injustice, black communities cannot meaningfully pursue the promised happiness in circumstances where instead of being advanced ahead of whites, as the Constitution directs, they, blacks, are made to compete with them on equal basis. And well, on an equal basis with foreigners sometimes. In the absence of good legislation, black business persons are left with no legal basis to challenge what appears in practice to be undeserved empowerment and advancement of generally well-to-do whites. When we thought about this airport tender, ground handling, we have to be inserted that black people have panel, the black-owned company has panel-beaten equipment. They will not be able to run. It's a fact. That's what we meet in trying to assert your right as a black person in this country because there is no protection. Hellish life awaits. More regrettable is the fact that blacks are now subjected to insult when seeking to question the legitimacy and propriety of economic opportunities disproportionately given to well-resourced whites and sometimes to foreigners. The blame must go to those who shy away from making laws aimed at directly and indirectly advancing black people. Legislation aside, forget about legislation. The Constitution also enjoins the executive to implement policies, policies are not legislation, and programs aimed at redressing socio-economic imbalances in our society. On the contrary, with respect, executive timidness over the years when it comes to the implementation of policies and programs aimed at redressing social imbalances in our country is not only visible, I'm talking about executive timidness to be aggressive and radical. It's not only visible, it is felt by everybody. It is embarrassing, in fact. And it is, in fact, distressing. The problem appears to be that some who aspire to take up strategic positions in government and public parastatals lack the acquired skills and awareness to do what is required. See, there is a judgment in this country, Supreme Court judgment. A foreign-owned entity, the road costing about $1 billion, tender. Then successful, an engineer black, an economist black, teaming up with another company against a fully owned foreign company. The other one tender almost $1 billion, the foreign company, for that road. The black joint venture with a foreign company the price is lower with 66 million. The tender committee gives it to a black person to break joint venture with a foreigner. The tender board, the board of directors, road authority those years, decided to overturn and give it to a foreign entity, 66 million above, more than the one owned by a black. Supreme Court, and this is public information. It's not secret information. Supreme Court said this award to a foreign company, 66 million up, was wrong. But by that time, the road was almost complete. That is the problem we have. And those members of the board of directors are black. Hence, you have a situation where a white person has a luxury and comfort in our society, and comfort to conveniently choose a preferred career without the risk of ending up with nothing. What do I mean? If the Ministry of Home Affairs advertises position for immigration officers, 10 positions, 10,000 black graduates would apply. A white person has the luxury to say, it's not for me, without a risk of losing anything. But not for a black person. If you don't apply, you will be in the street, young person. So we have a situation where it is common that 5,000 black Namibians could conceivably apply for a single vacant position for a cleaner. It would be considered a shock if a white person were to be amongst those applicants. This is so because there will not be social or economic circumstances strong enough to throw a white person into such desperation. While young black people fight for position as immigration officers to man our border posts, it is unthinkable for whites to apply for such position, and it's a fact. In fact, I would be surprised if in the present day Namibia a white person were to apply for a position of a cadet constabulary in the Namibian police. It won't happen. If it happens, it's a rare case, because they have a luxury of choosing. There are no socio-economic conditions throwing them into desperation. This is because that particular community still has the relative luxury and benefit of preferred and almost guaranteed career choices. There are now jobs conspicuously considered to be of lower quality to one racial group in Namibia. How then in this society can blacks pursue the promised pursuit of happiness? Those amongst blacks who have been fortunate enough to economically advance ahead of others are burdened by daily requests of donation from other blacks. Look at WhatsApp groups created only to seek small amount as little as $20. It is the continuous and the daily request for donation to bury loved ones, daily request to pay school fees for others, daily request to buy basic food for others that makes black success futile and nugatory. Because black poverty is contagious and vicarious. Black poverty affects and reaches out to every black person. In these circumstances, even those black who are said to be worthy are actually not worthy, as they, more often than not, have to carry the heavy burden of caring for others. How do we then enjoy the benefit from promised pursuit of happiness in the preamble of the Constitution? Akapandi tried until last day of his life. It is now 37 years since our dance for freedom. We are very far from enabling our citizens, especially blacks, to pursue a life of happiness. Instead, poverty-induced mental distress is now a very serious health risk. And more alarmingly, suicides are on the rise in figures not seen before. While some leaders and some naive motivational speakers seek to cajole or ask the poor to dream bigger and to be hopeful. In truth, one cannot dream or be hopeful when you cannot begin to live. People must first live before being asked to dream. Parliament on its own, I'm afraid to say, I'm concluding, is not giving us much hope. Instead of enacting legislation to advance those who were socially and economically disadvantaged, I dare observe that at some point in the past, the best place to learn the best skills to throw a killer punch was unfortunately on the floor of the National Assembly. I'm not lying to you. Incidents of such nature have been seen. The best place to learn how to insult the best, sometimes in the past, it was in the National Assembly. So, the cocktail of pain, anguish, despair, and distress we find ourselves in when it comes to the realization of the pursuit of happiness is aggravated by many other factors. These include bad culture, bad mindset, and black on black hate and dislike. We need a total mindset reconstruction. Our founding fathers and mothers may have promised us the pursuit of happiness and the life of dignity, but the sad truth is that many of those who aspire to take a position in public service in many cases are not well socialized into fundamental values and norms in our Constitution. I can tell you, somebody can aspire to be on a board of directors dishing out public tenders, but doesn't know and doesn't care to read Article 23, Sub-Article 2 about empowerment. Doesn't know. Doesn't begin to open a constitution. Whenever I open a constitution, is searching whether there are social benefit after retirement. Nothing about the trigger event to look at the constitution is whether or not you have a license to legislate and empower those who were in the past subjected to injustice. That's a problem. You don't need a degree. It is common to find someone aspiring to be put in charge of programs and policies aimed at redressing imbalances and advancing those who were formerly disadvantaged, yet such a person has never taken time to consider the constitutional imperative obligating government to put such praise and programs and policies in place. More disconcertingly, success in black community usually becomes a burden on its own. Apart from a financial burden being put on a successful black person like Akapandi was, by immediate and extended family members and other indigent members of the community, a successful black person would more often than not be subjected to ridicule, negative publicity, and the grossest mental distress born out of well-calculated attacks directed at him or her, mostly out of jealousy, and in some cases for political reasons. In those circumstances, even for the few successful black, the promised pursuit of happiness will remain an elusive ideal. When we continue remembering the life of Akapandi for years to come, we must be inspired to fight for real advancement of black. It is time that in all our action we work as much as we can to advance blacks. There's no shame about it. It is constitutionally authorized. Lest I ominously caution, there will never be the pursuit of happiness. I thank you, and may God continue blessing Namibia.